And hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Forbes Sports Money. I'm Bob Lorenz, joined as always by my co-host, Michael Ozanian. And as always, sir, a pleasure. The deal maker, Sal Galatioto, joining us for our State of Sports discussion, brought to you by SAP. We're going to start with the NHL collective bargaining agreement with its players. The players say they're going to reopen it. It expires in September. Sal, is this a good thing for the NHL, or do you think ultimately it might be a bad thing?
It's going to be a very difficult negotiation. I think both sides are pretty well entrenched. The union is going to be asked to give up significant amounts. If you look at what's happened in the NBA players and the NFL players both, they took pretty big cuts in their share of revenues. So I think the NFL is kind of the leader in this thing first. The NHL is going to have to follow that model. They're both around or below 50%. Right now, the NHL players are at 57% of revenues. So it's going to be a tough negotiation, in addition to which, both the commissioner, who's a very tough negotiator, and Donald Fehr, who's now leading the Players Association, those are two very powerful personalities. So it could be tough.
If I'm a hockey player, I'm saying, well, geez, last year the Montreal Canadiens sold for $575 million. The Maple Leafs, as part of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, that whole sports conglomerate, which includes the Raptors, sold for over $1 billion, saying, geez, the league looks pretty good. Now, I'm sure the owners are going to be saying, well, we've been trying to sell the Coyotes since 2009. The Devils are in deep financial trouble right now. The Blues sold for $120 million. Dave Checketts took a loss on that team. I mean, both sides are going to be pointing, to the good and the bad here. Is the problem really that you have such a huge gap between the haves and the have-nots?
I think that's it, Mike. I mean, there's a real bifurcation in value. The top teams, there's huge demand for them, and they're profitable, and they're running, hitting on all cylinders. The bottom half of the league is not doing that well. And the problem is, I think the league overall doesn't have enough revenues to share to make up for the losses at the smaller teams. So the players are going to have to give some. And what the problem with the floor and the cap. I mean, that causes a tremendous problem for small market teams that have to spend at least to the floor. Many of them just lose money having to do that.
Do you think that created part of the problem with the salary structure, in that if you have to spend up to a certain amount, you might actually overpay for players that don't deserve a certain amount per year?
No doubt. The floor had all kinds of unintended consequences. And you remember when they did this latest collective bargaining agreement, the Canadian dollar was around 70 cents to the dollar. It appreciated to par and then slightly above par. So that inflates the league revenues just from there, and that drags up the cap and the floor. And, of course, some teams have to spend to the floor, and it condemns them to losing money.
Right, and the floor is important because it can only be $16 million under the cap. So that's to Bob's point. The stronger Canadian dollar, I mean, how do you deal with that in a CBA? Because when this started, the Canadian dollar wasn't nearly as strong relative to the U.S. dollar as it is today. And the players get paid in U.S. dollars, so it is vital. I mean, can teams hedge against that, or is it something you really have to work into the CBA?
Over a 5 or 7 year agreement, it's almost impossible to hedge. It's too long term. I think what you need to do is work it into the CBA and have some adjustment mechanisms. If the only reason that revenues are growing is because of something artificial like the depreciation of the U.S. dollar, then okay, we have to adjust the CBA for that. No one really thought about it during the last CBA, but it was a real big problem.
All right, so let's talk about that floor. Could they just drop the floor? Would that be an easy answer, or would that create a whole new set of problems?
I think what you would have to do is drop the cap and the floor. And I think that's exactly what the owners are going to ask for. They're going to ask for a lower floor and a lower cap. The players are going to be hard-pressed to give that up. Look, they feel that they really gave a lot in the last CBA. So it's going to get very tough to get them to move. Plus, Donald Fehr is a very tough negotiator. We know that from baseball. So this could lead to a labor stoppage, which would be really unfortunate for the league.
Could this undermine some of the good stuff that's happened with the NHL? I mean, they do have a new TV deal. $2 billion over 10 years. It's about 60%, 55% bigger than the last deal. Teams like the LA Kings, $21 million a year on average cable deal. They don't even have good ratings, and that's, because sports programs become very valuable. They're in a big market. We've seen some momentum here in the NHL. What would happen with a lockout? What happened the last time?
Well, it's really negative. I mean, look, north of the border, hockey's like religion, so people will wait and it won't impact very much in Canada, but especially in the non-traditional hockey markets here in the United States, it really has an impact on attendance. It hurts it when the league comes back, and especially if you have a long lockout. then it's a real big problem.
And I think there was a slip in revenues after the 05 lockout the following season, so we did see a financial hit, that the league took.
Absolutely, and remember, this league relies more on gate than any other of the leagues. So you need to get people in the seats, and that really impacts the overall economics of the league if people stop coming, and a long lockout could cause that to happen again.
All right, I'm going to bring up something that I think I already know the answer to, but we've talked about some of the weaker teams' attendance problems, losing big money. Why not contract by a few teams?
Contracting is very difficult. I mean, first of all, you have to figure out how to finance the contraction, what those teams are worth, and the union is not going to be in favor of contraction. In any industry, they don't like to lose jobs, so they're going to be really dead set against that. So it's going to be difficult to do.
NBA and NFL have found different ways to do revenue sharing. I would assume that has to be the case here, but to what extent? Because if you're a very successful team, I mean, this is across the board for any sports sale. You know this. They don't, the haves, the guys that are making money, don't want to keep going into their pocket and giving it to somebody else.
Oh, you're absolutely right, and especially the newer buyers. Rogers Communications paid a ton of money for the Maple Leafs, and they're not going to say, okay, well, now you can take half my revenues and give it to somebody else. They're going to be opposed to it. The more successful teams, the Rangers, the Bruins, the Canadians. So there's going to be friction between the owners, and then there's going to be friction between the owners and the players. So this is really not a simple negotiation.
End game, I know. Occasionally you bring a small crystal ball with you. A lot of people don't know Sal has one of those. What do you think is going to happen
Well,
here?
there's a lockout in the NFL. There's a lockout in the NBA. And unfortunately, I think there probably will be a lockout in the NHL.